The Belgian Grand Prix is a staple of the Formula 1 calendar, and while modern racing might leave a lot to be desired when they go to the Belgian Grand Prix, over the years that we've had the Belgian Grand Prix, it's contributed a lot to motorsport history. It's held at a circuit that's seen a lot in the years that it's been in use. Everything from triumph to boycotts to tragedy, with the 1960 edition of the Belgian Grand Prix seeing 2 fatalities in the space of mere minutes. The first was Chris Bristow when he lost control at Malmedy battling with Willy Meiress, and then crashed into a 4-foot embankment. He was then ejected from the car and landed on a barbed wire fence, which decapitated him. 5 laps later, Alan Stacey was hit in the face by a bird at Master, which caused him to crash. He was trapped inside the burning car and was burned to death. It could have actually been 3 deaths that weekend, because Sterling Moss was involved in a hefty shunt in practice. 1966 saw the massive deluge that caused Jackie Stewart to crash, and it was at that point that Spa's days were numbered, at least in its old configuration. When the apex of a corner is somebody's driveway, and there's the possibility of your race or life being ended by a telegraph pole, then there's something up with that. Crash barriers? What crash barriers? Armco is for sissies. If you don't like it, slow down. What's that? You'll boycott? No, don't be silly. You won't boycott Spa, and you're not going to boycott the Nürburgring either. You're bluffing. They weren't bluffing. These days though, the track is much, much safer, even if the layout ironically resembles an automatic pistol. The Eau Rouge Raidillon section has come under increasing scrutiny in recent years, with seemingly every endurance race at Spa in the last 5 years or so having to be slowed down or stopped so they can reassemble the barriers at that particular section. Is it because of the corner, or are people trying to go flat out? You decide. But there has been changes to the runoff there in the last few years. But it's still very much a driver's track. All the drivers love it, and the fans love it, and it's a track that even though it's been modernised, it still retains that historic feel, much like Silverstone, Monza, Indianapolis and Le Mans do. The circuit evolved to have all the modern safety stuff on it, while newer tracks have it all pre-installed. And I guess that's why the older tracks still have that charm about them. And the gamers love it. GT3 at Spa is a surefire way of getting people online. But if you mess it all up when you're clearly the fastest person around this particular track, you'll end up handing victory to somebody else. And that's exactly what Williams did in the 1996 edition of the Belgian Grand Prix. And this was coming at a time when neither Hill nor Villeneuve wanted to win the title. At least, that's how it seemed anyway. At the previous round at the Hungaroring, Villeneuve had taken the win from 3rd on the grid. And while I say it seemed like neither Hill nor Villeneuve wanted to win, this was at a point in the season where things seemed to flip-flop between which Williams was doing well and which one wasn't. While Hill and Villeneuve had endured horrible Monaco and Spanish Grand Prix, Hill had won at Montreal and at Manicourt. Hill then retired at Silverstone, with Villeneuve winning at the British Grand Prix to exact some revenge for that result in Canada. Damon would bounce back at Germany with Villeneuve 3rd, but Villeneuve would then win in Hungary, as already mentioned. So as it was, the standings had Damon leading the championship on 79 points, while JV had 62. Still, all to play for, and with reliability a thing in those days and 10 points for a win, if Villeneuve won a race with Damon not finishing, that gap would shrink to 5 points. Alesi was a long way back in 3rd on 35 points, while Schumacher was 4th on 29. Although since the revised version of the Ferrari appeared at the Canadian Grand Prix, things were starting to get better for them. Except for Manicourt. We don't talk about Manicourt. For those that don't know, at the 1996 French Grand Prix, the Michaels engine blew up on the formation lap. The same thing would happen to Sebastian Vettel about 10 years later. I know Vettel said that he wanted to emulate Schumacher, but I don't think he wanted to do it in that way. In the Constructors' Championship though, Williams were already world champions. They secured the title at the previous round in Hungary, and the battle was now for the runner-up honours. With Benetton at this point looking strong, but Ferrari and McLaren were in the mix too. And actually, looking at it, I didn't realise how big the gap was at this point. Because the 1996 season review VHS tape that I've watched so many times that lines said in that video ends up in these videos, I thought Benetton and Ferrari were closer than they were at this point. I thought Ferrari was closer to Benetton than McLaren was to Ferrari. But then again, when you factor in that only one Ferrari was finishing races in 1996, actually, yeah, maybe it does make sense. Eddie Irvine had suffered something in the region of 6 mechanical retirements in a row at this point, so yeah, it wasn't looking good for the other Ferrari, but at least the reliability was slowly improving over the course of the season, especially since that updated Ferrari came at Montreal. So with the Constructors' Championship wrapped, the other question remained. Villeneuve doing the impossible and winning the championship at the first attempt, or would Damon finally do it and be the first son of a world champion to win the championship? Because, let's be honest, Hill and Villeneuve were the only two out there that could win the championship, and Williams must have been thinking about what to do. Because the previous year they'd handed Benetton a title through their own pit wall cock-ups and Damon overdriving. And there was the potential for Damon to lose it within sight of the finish line, much like Mansell had done 10 years prior. The 13th round of a 16-round 1996 season took the teams and drivers to the Ardennes Forest for one of the more popular races of the year, and thousands of Michael Schumacher fans streamed over the German border to watch their hero, only for Michael to have a massive accident in Friday practice, where he lost it going into no name and careened backwards into a tyre wall, hitting the wall so hard that the nose lifted up and then slammed down on the ground again. The Michael was fine, just a little stiff, and I've looked at footage of that accident and he lit the rears up coming out of Rivage. Not sure if that had anything to do with it, but it's something to consider. But the rear of the car and the gearbox had been destroyed in the accident, and Ferrari had only brought 3 gearboxes with them. The Williams cars in practice would have lesser cars hanging with them in the straight line sections, but all their time was gained in the middle bit, where it's twisty. Hill was the odds-on favourite for pole position and for the win, because he'd won here twice already. Sort of, because, 1994 he inherited the win, and also because for Villeneuve it was his first time at what was considered the hardest circuit on the calendar. Hockenheim should have suited him, and Monza should suit him as well because of his oval racing pedigree, but for a track like Spa, the only thing that would have come close for him would be Road America. But actually, he'd won at Road America in the 1995 kart season. The more you know. But JV wasn't going to be deterred by the fact that he was the new kid. In fact, he was one of only 2 rookies on the grid for the 1996 Belgian Grand Prix, the other being Riccardo Rossi in the footwork. Giovanni Lavaggi was in the Minardi replacing Giancarlo Fisichella, as Fizzy was finishing at the touring car season that he was racing in that year. And it's actually a good question to ask. What is the season with the fewest amount of rookies? I was going to say 0 in 2024 because the season started with the teams as they were in 2023. But then Ollie Behrman did his super sub rounds and Colapinto came in to replace Sargent after Zandvoort. It's a good question though. But Villeneuve had a trick up his sleeve. He'd been playing the Formula 1 game on the PlayStation and using that to learn all of the circuits, and then once he'd learnt the layout he would just simply adapt to how it was in real life with the real car. Fernando Alonso would do a similar thing to learn the Istanbul circuit for the Turkish Grand Prix. And somehow, Villeneuve took pole position, after learning the track on a video game, in a time before laser scanning, point clouds, high definition and physics based off real world data provided by the manufacturer even existed. Grand Prix 4 would use GPS data to build the tracks, but now, at least in the simulation genre, players won't accept less than laser scan tracks for the most amount of realism. Not only did Villeneuve take pole, he was nearly half a second faster than Damon, and the number 6 Williams dunked over a second on Schumacher's Ferrari. Not only that, the driver right at the back of the field in Pedro Lamy, who was driving for Minardi, was 6 seconds off the pace. That was the difference between fast and slow back then. And Lavaggi in the other Minardi had failed to qualify. With 40 having already gone bust, it must have been expected that Minardi would be next. But they weren't, and, well, everybody liked that. And part of the reason that Villeneuve had been able to secure pole is that he'd done his fastest laps before it started raining, and because it was raining, nobody was able to go faster, so Villeneuve got pole position. It was only the second of his Formula 1 career at this point. So the Williams cars looked unbeatable, but behind it was looking interesting. The Renault engine in the Benetton and the Mercedes engine in the McLaren were looking quite evenly matched, with both cars getting utterly humiliated by the superior aerodynamics of the Williams in the middle sector. So it looked like it might be a 5-way scrap between Alesi, Berger, Hakkinen, Coulthard and Schumacher for third at the end of the race. But a sensible person would be betting on the Benettons, since their race pace was usually much better, with McLaren and Ferrari reliability being weak. Schumacher was also lamenting the crash he had on Friday, saying that because of it they lost time where they could dial out some understeer that he was suffering with. Rain looked likely for the race, but it never came, so we had a dry one instead. But there were some other factors at play. Damon was starting the race in the spare car, or the T car as it would have been called back then, because he had a spin in the Sunday morning warm-up where cars would go out on race fuel and teams would sort their setups out. Because back then, they weren't locked in after qualifying like they are now. Damon didn't wreck the car in the spin, but what had happened was the car had gone backwards in a forward gear. Yeah, I know. So the race got underway and Villeneuve led Schumacher into turn 1 because Damon had got a poor start. By the midpoint of the lap, Damon would now be 4th behind Coulthard. But at the front, Villeneuve wasn't exactly getting away. Schumacher had found some drivability in his car, and after Villeneuve pulled around 2 seconds, Schumacher put in a couple of fast laps to keep the gap stable. And things got easier for him when Villeneuve locked up bigly into the bus stop and flat spotted his tyre. And when you have a big lockup, you get 2 things. A vibration because the tyre now resembles a 50p coin, as Martin Brundle would put it, and because of that flat spot, it becomes easier to lock up again on the same part of the tyre, making things worse. But Villeneuve had managed to keep the gap constant, despite the error. But Schumacher had taken advantage of Villeneuve's rookie status and pressured him into a mistake, making the Ferrari man's day a little bit easier. But Schumacher wasn't going to be in striking range just yet. It was looking like that Ferrari would have to pull a strategy blinder to get Michael to the front. But even in 1996, dirty air was proving to be an issue. Damon could not get past Coulthard back up into 3rd place because the dirty air coming off the McLaren was too much, and in the straight line sections the cars were pretty much equal in the speed traps. So while it wasn't going to be weather that decided the outcome of the race, it would be a backmarker instead. Down at the back of the field was Jos Verstappen in the footwork, and during the race he'd been suffering from problems and had been into the pits at the end of lap 9 to investigate a stuck throttle. But the footwork mechanics couldn't see anything wrong and he went back out, hoping that whatever was happening would sort itself out. But as the footwork went through Stavelot on the next lap, the car went off the road and shunted into the tyre wall, spraying debris and tyres absolutely everywhere. Because of the carnage, the safety car came out for only the 2nd race that season. It had been deployed to Argentina earlier that year. And this is where things get turned on their head, because at this point in history, the pits at Spa were tiny. Like, really tightly packed. It's why the upgrades were made in the 2000s to open everything up and change the bus stop from a, well, bus stop into what it is now. As a result, double stacking was not doable. I mean, it wasn't exactly efficient anyway because of refueling, but it meant that if both cars had to pit, one had to go round again, saving a boatload of fuel, losing time. In these days, if you could get into the pits immediately at Spa, you gained massively. Villeneuve had been ahead of Verstappen's crash and had been warned about the safety car over the radio. And with Villeneuve's IndyCar experience, pitting now would have been the best thing to do, and he was due to pit on the next lap anyway. They could have brought Villeneuve in now, changed his tyres, filled him up and sent him back on his way. And he would have kept the lead assuming Michael did the same thing and had a slower pit stop. But what lost Williams the race was that Villeneuve had been told to pit, but he hadn't heard the message. So they told Damon to come in instead, given that he was in a position to do so. Now for those that don't know about this layout of Spa, the pit lane entry was the escape road for the bus stop. If anything, it's similar to the pit entry in Montreal where you just don't brake and go straight on. The escape road did have a bit for cars to rejoin the track if they overshot the corner, or they would just simply list to the right and go on down the escape road to pit. Damon had been approximately 15 seconds behind Villeneuve and had actually been one of the first cars on the scene after Verstappen's smash. But as Damon was about to enter the pits, Adrian Newey came over the radio to tell him to stay out. But the call came too late. According to a report from the time, it was because the team needed to swap the equipment around. The teams would have 2 fuel rigs because drivers might need differing amounts of fuel and drivers might also be using a different compound of tyre. Because of the swapping over, Williams needed around 30 seconds to get Hill's fuel and tyres ready to service him when he came in. But in reality, they had only about 10 seconds or so, and they wouldn't be ready by the time Hill pulled into his pit box. Damon had to abandon his pit entry and was ordered to stop by some bollards that had a marshal standing next to them. The marshal held a lollipop similar to the ones that the pit crew used and had to hold Damon in position to then allow him to filter into a gap in the traffic. In doing so, he dropped to 6th. Meanwhile, Villeneuve had caught up to the safety car and then realised what Williams was trying to tell him over the radio. Shit, in French. And behind, Michael had pitted. So Villeneuve had to go around the rest of the lap at safety car speed and then pit. Hill would have to do another lap after that at safety car speed before he could pit. Because of the safety car queue, Williams lost out, and Ferrari gained. Schumacher had got himself into the lead, but later admitted that he'd got lucky, because he was due to pit on the lap that Verstappen crashed anyway. It wasn't some tactical blinder by him and Ferrari, it was the fuel tank making the call. Villeneuve dropped to 5th in the chaos, while Hill was in a lowly 13th. The two McLarens of Hakkinen and Coulthard, who were once stopping, stayed out, but after 7 laps behind the safety car, Villeneuve got past the Lazy's Benetton and then went after the Michael. But then the two cars became stuck in the McLaren dirty air. When the McLarens finally pitted, Schumacher led, with Villeneuve stuck in Ferrari dirty air. The Williams was clearly superior in the middle sector, but Villeneuve just could not find a way past because of the nature of the track, which sounds a lot like this year's sprint race, doesn't it? But the two guys at the front had their own problems. Michael had worked out that he could ride the curbs at the bus stop and use that to get a little bit of an advantage, but then he found that he had some play in the steering wheel that almost scared him into retiring. Villeneuve meanwhile was having his tyres destroyed by running in dirty air and found that his car was understeering quite badly after about 5 or 6 laps or so. As a result, when it came to the second round of stops, Schumacher, who had less knackered rubber, was able to push a little bit harder and managed to keep the lead, despite having a slower stop. The outlaps for both cars were identical, but Schumacher's better in-lap sealed it. Villeneuve once again destroyed his tyres behind the Ferrari and then started having engine issues, so he settled for second while backing off a little bit. So Schumacher won his second race of the season by just over 5.5 seconds. Hakkinen completed the podium in 3rd, with a Lazy in 4th for Benetton. Hill was a distant 5th, and while that seemed like a good result for Villeneuve, JV only gained 4 points on Damon. He needed at least 6 per race if he wanted to win the title. So this result was the equivalent of Williams finishing 1-2 with Villeneuve the winner and Damon in 2nd. It was also Damon's worst result of the season and only the 2nd time he'd finish off the podium all year, the other time being his 4th place at the Nürburgring. Berger recovered to 6th to take the final point after losing many positions after a spin where he clanged into Irvine, and then Salo finished in 7th for Tyrrell. This being after he was in 3rd at one point with the safety car stops. And only 10 runners finished the race, with Irvine retiring with another gearbox or engine related issue on lap 29. That was his 7th in a row at this point, and he would run up a total streak of 8. The Williams was so far ahead of everybody that the only way anybody else was going to win the race is if something happened to them. Michael had got his car into a position to capitalise, but he could only capitalise if Williams messed up or broke down. And that's what he was able to do here. Williams fumbled it so badly with the pit stops, and Schumacher just went, "Yep, cheers lads, thanks for the freebie," in German. And yes, Schumacher did get the car into 3rd on the grid and was able to take advantage of Damon's slow start, but he was able to get himself into a position where if the Williams cars had issues, the race was his. But like I said, that's the only way anybody could win a race that year except for Williams. But then again, Schumacher was the only driver on the grid able to actually be able to do that to start with, so it's a little bit of one, a little bit of the other. It's partly Williams ballsing it up with a strategy, and it's also partly Schumacher being very good at what he did. But reading up on it, a lot of places are mentioning dirty air and how it was ruining cars in the middle sector, especially given the cars were largely equal in the straight line sections. So any aero advantage wasn't going to help if the cars couldn't pass. But that's the nature of Spa, really. Schumacher and Villeneuve stuck behind the McLarens, Damon stuck behind Coulthard, and we're always talking about dirty air being a new thing. And speaking of Monza, that really was the epitome of do either of you want this championship or not, and Schumacher would once again be first in line to pick up the pieces when Williams ballsed it up. But I'll get to that race eventually. We're going to be talking a lot about tyre stacks. It's a good one, if you never saw it the first time round. So then, a look at the 1996 Belgian Grand Prix, where Michael Schumacher and Ferrari were in a prime spot to pick up where Williams dropped the ball. If this has been a fun look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done. And for more from the channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon for the continued support. And if you want to help out with image purchasing or otherwise keeping the lights on, there's a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Well, there's super thanks for one and done donations and memberships so you can do Patreon style support, but without going to Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.